Venerable Amma Thanasanti Bhikkhuni ordained as a Buddhist nun in 1991 in the Thai forest tradition. She currently is based in Shakti Vihara hermitage in Colorado as a solitary nun. Welcome, Amma.
Thank you, Kathy.
It's nice to be here again, right? I'm having this sense of deja vu. So in this segment, we're going to be talking about your toolbox, your meditation toolbox, about how we can sort of enhance our practices with these tools.
One of the important tools in my toolbox is body awareness. And so what's really important for me during the day is to drop attention into my body, to notice how I'm feeling, to notice the tension in my body, to notice the way in which I'm holding my posture. Because what can happen is throughout a day is that I can have unconscious patterns that are emerging that allow more tension in my body to start to accumulate than is actually helpful. So just dropping attention into my body, noticing what I'm feeling, noticing how I'm standing, how I'm sitting, how I'm walking, helps me release some of these things which went underneath the radar, I wasn't aware of. Another part of my toolbox, which is really important, is to bring forward a heart of loving kindness and to make that a priority, both in the way that I'm responding to the things that are arising in my own heart, body, and mind, and also in the way that I'm responding to other people. Because also what can go on underneath the radar is a judgmental, critical mind state that is not kind or compassionate or skillful in relating to what's happening. You know, like this kind of judge is sitting on our shoulders kind of berating us, and that somehow it's our fault or we're not good enough or that we can never get it right. And to just notice these things as the absence of loving kindness. And so rather than following or believing or looking at this as if it's the truth, noticing that this is not the truth, this is not what kindness is, this is not actually the voice that I want to bring to myself or to others.
So let's talk about the loving kindness a little bit. I mean, it seems to me that that loving kindness aspect is integral to what you're saying to your practice, but I guess it also flows out into the greater world, right? So if we're critical of ourselves, you can only assume that we're also critical of the greater world.
Yeah, we're not able to give away something that we don't have. So if we don't have a basis of loving kindness, a basis of self-respect, a basis of ease and well-being in ourselves, then it's not easy for us to be a force of loving kindness, a force of ease, a force of harmlessness in the world.
So let's talk a little bit more about this body awareness you were talking about. How, I mean, in the previous segment, we talked a little bit about sort of the anxiety or that kind of portion of the body, but can you be a little bit more specific and talk about the body awareness and how it relates to our meditation practice?
Well, you know, one of the things that I notice, because I also have a computer and I do emails and things like that, is I notice that when I'm on the computer, my attention gets pulled into the computer. And when my attention gets pulled into the computer, I tend to experience dispersion and distraction. And so when I shift my focus of attention from looking at the screen to noticing what my feet feel like or what it feels like sitting in the chair, or if I stand up and I walk around a little bit, that shift of focus of attention from the screen, which is causing my system to feel dispersed and distracted and not very concentrated, and then to have all of these different thoughts come and have a much stronger impact, then the body awareness gives me a ground that helps me settle, it helps me collect, it helps me feel a little bit more still, and it helps me be able to make much better choices in how I'm responding to what it is that's arising, in order to prioritize what needs my attention right now, in order to pay attention to where I need to be careful not to get stuck or caught.
And so to talk about that more literally, so what you're saying is like if you're at the computer, you sort of drop into your body, become more aware of what's
That's
going on.
right. So if I'm looking at the screen and I'm doing work on a writing document or I'm writing emails or something like that, you know, either I'll change my posture and stand up and walk around and get away from the computer screen, or I will shift my focus and feel my feet touching the floor, feel my weight in the chair, feel the shape of my body in the space. I shift my focus from being immersed in the screen and the document and what it is that I'm writing, and change my attention so that I'm actually paying attention to what's happening in my body.
And do you have any tricks for doing that? Because I think that for me that would be a nice theory, but I think the reality of me actually remembering to come back into my body or get up from my computer or, you know, sort of reorienting myself, I don't know that it would actually happen.
It happens when you practice doing it. And sometimes because computers are so compelling, it's helpful to have reminders or alarms or something flash on the screen, say, you know, shift your focus, pay attention to your body, take a break, go for a walk, you know, shift your focus slightly so that your posture is different. Because, you know, what can happen in front of a computer is you can be sitting for hours and not move. And that's not healthy or normal or natural, or that's not something that brings about ease and well-being. So part of it is setting it up so that the normal thing that the computer does, we can use the computer to help us to get out of those habits, you know?
So do you have any other toolbox tricks or any other way that it sort of manifests, or any other way you tap into it?
Well, one of the things that has been a really big learning for me over the many years that I've been meditating is the difference between observation and engagement. And that'll take a little bit of context setting so you understand what I'm talking about. Meditation, really, the art form of meditation, in many ways, is to observe what's arising. We watch our thoughts, we watch our moods, we watch our feelings, we observe our body sensations, we observe them. And there's an unbelievable amount of value in being able to do that in terms of not identifying, in terms of more peace, in terms of less reactivity, in terms of more skill, in terms of more choice. There's a huge value in learning how to observe and being able to do that. But if you come from, if like you had situations like I did, where things happen to you and you get knocked into a state of consciousness that's like a regress state, like you're operating from a much younger mind state, like all of a sudden you feel like a child, then the teachings around observation is not what's needed in that. And so what can happen, at least what I did for many years, is because I had such a lot of confidence that meditation was actually going to be the thing that was going to sort everything out, I would bring the tools to meditation into areas that it's actually not useful for them to be brought into. And one of the places it's not useful for them to be brought into is exactly in those places where all of a sudden you feel much younger. You feel vulnerable, you feel scared, you feel overwhelmed, you feel frightened, you don't feel like you have access to the resources that you ordinarily feel that you have access to. And when I would bring observation into that, then that state of feeling vulnerable and scared would last longer, because I didn't actually have the qualities of mindfulness present in that state to be able to use the observation in the way that it is intended. And so what I needed to learn how to do was to recognize when that was happening, and the way I could learn how to recognize it was because my body felt different. There were body sensations that felt different when I would go into this space of feeling all of a sudden quite a bit younger or very little. And when
Can you give me some examples of that?
Examples of what I would feel?
Yeah, like what were the sensations that you were experiencing in your body when you felt like you were in a regressed state?
I don't feel so grounded.
Do you feel disconnected from your body?
No, I don't feel disconnected, but I feel I don't feel grounded, and all of a sudden it feels like I'm by myself, I'm all alone, and I have to figure this all out on my own. And the physical sensations of that is that I don't feel connected to the world around me. I feel like a solid, separate lump that has to figure it all out. Whereas normally, like particularly like when I'm in the Garden of the Gods, I feel like I'm connected to everything. And that feeling of being connected to everything has a quality of relaxation and a sense of ease, that there's this whole web that I am just one small part of. When I'm in these regress states, that sense of web completely evaporates. There's no web. There's just me. And I got to figure it out. And I feel totally underqualified, unprepared, under-resourced to be able to do it. Like a 2-year-old would be under-resourced to figure out a problem, you know, that adults have to navigate. They just can't do it, you know. So then what I have needed to learn how to do is to recognize that and to know, oh, this is what's happening. And then to move back and forth between the sensations and the experience of that young person and what she's needing, and call forth the wisdom and the resource that I have access to when I'm not feeling that. So it's moving my attention back and forth between being in it and bringing wisdom and care and attention to it as if I were somebody outside. This process is the difference between observation and engagement. So, like, you know, for me, for a long time, I've had some kind of an issue around feeling sad. So there's something about sadness that evokes a regress state for me, okay? And so when I recognize this is what's happening, then I need to bring the care and kindness and attention to myself in an age-appropriate way. So let's say, for example, I feel about 3, you know? And so I remember once this happened where I was at Chithurst Forest and I felt about 3, and it was really hard for me to make sense out of what was happening. But I could watch what was going on from this other part of me that could see it. And so what I did was I imagined taking myself by my hand and walking around the pond and looking at the bunnies and talking to the bunnies about how everybody can feel sad and that sadness is a normal thing. And as I was talking to myself the way you would talk to a 3-year-old and give permission for feeling sad, then it didn't take very long to come out of that state into the normal access to resources that I ordinarily have, and then to be able to work with what was arising from the perspective of observation. But as long as I was in that state, I couldn't use observation. I didn't have access to the tools that observation would give me. It just made me feel more alone.
Right. So first you had to attend to that
Exactly.
child or that regress state
Exactly.
before you could move forward.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for me, there's a learning about how to recognize that this happens and how to attend to it and how to become very sophisticated in figuring out exactly the age that I'm at and bringing a language that's appropriate for a 3-year-old. Because we would not tell a 3-year-old, go sit in the room by yourself on a cushion, don't talk to anybody, and figure it out by yourself.
Well, you might. that has happened. But it does make much, much more sense, because I think that our normal way of being would be to sort of like reprimand ourselves, don't be like that, or to push through it, or whatever it is.
Right, because what happens is that we bring an overlay. I'm this old, I've been meditating this many years, I should be able to figure this out. I should be able to figure this out. We miss what's actually happening, which is that I can't figure it out because I'm not actually having access to those levels of resources that I normally do.
And that sort of judgment or that whatever is sort of is a barrier to actually stepping beyond it. But once you sort of just deal with that.
This is what's happening, this is what's needed, and then it can shift quite quickly.
Yes.
Yeah.
But first you have to do that.
Yeah.
And I think so much of the time we spend our whole lives not tending to it, and
Right.
so we can't move beyond anything.
Exactly. And you see, for me, you know, I came to meditation with a very, very deep faith and conviction that meditation would sort everything out. And my experience is that it sorts an enormous amount out, but it doesn't sort everything out.
Yeah.
And so some of these things require other tools in order to actually access what's going on and work with it.
One of the other things that has been happening as I'm meeting with these various people from various traditions, a lot of them talk about therapy as like being a useful tool. You know, it's not separate from meditation. It doesn't have to be different. You know, like it's part of it. It's just something that we do to take care of ourselves, and why not?
And
you know?
so for me, I could not learn, or I did not learn how to do this without having somebody in the role as a therapist to actually hold the space for me first until I could figure out how to do it for myself. So, me too.
Yeah, and I'm really happy that you're sharing this sort of tool with us, because it does make complete sense, you know. And I think that, I mean, I've been meditating for a few years, but you know, and I think that I have this feeling that like I should marshal through stuff, you know, or just observe it, or just be with it, or whatever, and that's going to solve everything. But this is like it's a different spin to it. It's
This is where the whole understanding of integral awakening is really actually very helpful. The practice of observation is useful after a certain level of development is there. And what I've experienced is that the meditation actually illuminated the developmental things, the tasks that were not completely done or not solid, or where there were fissures or cracks. So it's not that you have to get it all figured out before you can meditate. But my understanding when I started meditating was that meditation was going to sort everything out. It was going to sort out all of my developmental issues, every kind of suffering. It was going to be the only thing that I needed. And what I have experienced is that meditation is hugely valuable for understanding how to bring this quality of observation into one's experience, and for being able to see the non-substantial nature of our own experience, that it's conditioned. But it does not by itself help with these developmental tasks, and it does not by itself solve collective community issues. So when we were in the monastery and there was issues around the difference of status between one gender and the other gender, the meditation did not address that. It did not address the systemic issues that were embedded in the society. Okay? So, and I came thinking that if I just meditated enough, then all of my suffering would release. And then I felt bad because it didn't. Like that I'm not doing it good enough. I'm not doing it right. But the problem wasn't that I wasn't doing it right. The problem that I was bringing meditation into areas that it didn't actually serve. It was not designed to resolve.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then you needed this other tool.
Right. Yeah.
So you were saying, just to sort of recap that, what you're saying is when you find that you sort of regressed or gone into this other space that can't just be, oh God, solved by observation, that what we need to do is sort of identify it and relate to it in a way and talk to it.
That's right. Identify with it, identify it, relate to it, engage with it in a way where you're giving permission that it's there and helping to reframe and understand what's happening. Because the conflict is that there's, like for me with the sadness, there's some kind of a mechanism in my mind that says that feeling sad is not okay.
Right.
So there needs to be another part of me that gives permission to both recognize that I feel sad and give permission for the fact that it's okay to feel sad. But I'm dealing with a young part of my mind. And so like sophisticated language is not what's needed. Language that is really appropriate for a 3-year-old is the most targeted way of dealing with that, if that's the age that I'm at. Yeah. So I need to recognize that it's happening. I need to get a sense of what age this is happening at. I need to be able to bring a way of framing what's happening into the language that's appropriate from where I'm at, and move back and forth between the skill of being able to support and the direct experience of feeling what it feels like to be in it, to move back and forth between those two. And that as I do that, then I come out of that regress state quickly and then can use the tools that I have from meditation then to figure out what's needed now and what do I need to do.
And so the way you do that is by talking to yourself. Is that what you're saying?
I
like
do
sort
it,
of self-talk.
By talking to myself and by feeling what it feels like, so that I can get a sense of what age I'm at and get a sense of what's actually happening. So that sense of it's not an articulation, but there's a sense that it's not okay to feel sad. So I can feel it's not okay to feel sad, and then the part of me that registers that, picks up on that, and then reframes it and says, everybody feels sad.
Right.
Everyone's allowed to feel sad. Sadness is something that we all feel. Even the bunnies feel sad.
In a 3-year-old world, yes, they do. And I think that sort of applies to a very wide range of emotions, not just sadness, but anger, we talked about in another segment, or any of these other emotions that are difficult for us, that if we can kind of see them for what they are and then talk to them, and like you said, in an age-appropriate way.
So that's when we work with ourselves, but one of the things that happens is that my activation can often activate the people that I'm closest to. And so what can happen is you get 2 people who are moving in and out of regress states. And so you get 2 people who are actually operating from a position of being a child. And it's often the case when that you've got
That's
two children without an adult around helping
Or a
and
whole room full of
supervising,
'em.
then you end up in tears. And
Yeah.
as adults, we're not tracking what's happening. And so it can be very confusing as to what is actually going on that we get so upset.
Yeah, and I think that culturally we don't have a lot of those tools to really communicate and really identify our own emotions and to work with that and then identify someone else's emotions and work with that. I think that it's very complicated to identify all that, and we're not so great at it.
We're not so great at it.
You know, as you were talking, I was thinking that must have taken a long time for you to sort of really work that out, you know, to really figure out, I'm going to this regress state, and this is how I deal with this regress state. I mean, you know, it's like something, it's like a work in progress, right?
Very much so, and it takes a long time. And part of the reason why there was a willingness to do it was because I was noticing the result, which was suffering, but I couldn't actually figure out how I got there. So it was like a black box. There's some kind of a trigger, something happens, I don't know what happens, and I end up in a space that's very uncomfortable. And so trying to figure out, like, it's retracing the steps of the Yeti. I couldn't see the Yeti, but I could see the footsteps. I could see the suffering that would result, but I couldn't actually see how I got there.
Yeah, you know, it makes me think about something, but now I think I lost my thought, but it makes me think about, like, when we go so far along different paths, and then we're not able to sort of, like, work it out in the communities that we're in, and because we didn't identify properly what was actually going on, and so all this behavior happens.
But I think part of it is like, particularly in the community that I originally ordained in, there was a very deep-seated belief that if you meditated enough, you'd be able to sort everything out. And then it took us a long time to learn that some of us needed parallel practices to support us to be able to make good use of the meditation.
Yeah, I'm surprised that there wasn't like a practices within the community, and maybe practices isn't quite the right word, but like mechanisms within your community to sort of, I mean, you're living in community, you know, so like there's a lot of stuff going on. I mean, I'm not living in a monastery, but I already know that there's a lot of stuff going on. So I'm surprised that there wasn't mechanisms to sort of deal with that stuff, or maybe there was. Not really? Not any more than normal society.
We developed our own mechanisms, but we developed our own mechanisms based on a real wisdom of what was actually happening and what was needed.
Mm-hmm. But there wasn't that wasn't part of the tradition. It was just something that you
as a community of nuns, we developed.
You figured it out.
We figured out mechanisms.
Oh, that's kind of beautiful, though, too.
Yeah.
Because then it really becomes your own.
That's
right. You know, it's your own. It's your own problem, but it's your own solution too.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Wow. So, is there anything else you have to add, like that we haven't quite covered? We got about a couple minutes.
Well, I guess the other toolbox for me has been nature, because, you know, when I've gotten disorganized or unsettled, and, you know, and I'm trying to figure out a way to return to center, when I go into nature and I relax in nature, then that has had a really powerful way of helping to refocus my attention in something which is wholesome, allow my attention to settle, and then to be able to see clearly more about what's happening, as well as to be able to see it in perspective so that the agitation around it releases. So for me, another big, huge thing in the toolbox is time in places of nature. Because the natural elements and the contact with something which is not fabricated, and the ability to let nature support me has become stronger over the years.
Great. We're almost out of time. We got about a minute or two. I think that you've been doing a little bit of teaching around. I know I've seen you in New York City speaking. You're in Colorado. You do?
I do virtual retreats.
Oh.
I have a conference call on Sunday mornings. It's actually midday, 12 to 1 here. And I'm teaching a retreat tomorrow, beginning tomorrow, and at the Grail, which is up at the Hudson. And yes, so I am around, I teach. So if you're interested in knowing more or coming and visiting, you're welcome to find my teaching program, my teaching schedule. I've got a website and an email list, and I have the teaching schedule.
And you're on Facebook?
And I'm on Facebook.
Yes, you are. You are on Facebook.
And so you can find me if you're interested in finding me.
Yeah, that's great. I
Okay.
want to thank you for coming, and I'm so happy that you just happened to be coming through New York again so soon. And I'm sure we will sort of be in touch and run across each other in the future.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate your invitation. It's lovely to be here with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.